have a variety of emotions, don't we? On the one hand, the page is fresh, we think. We haven't written anything on the volume of 2025. On the other hand, nothing is essentially new or fresh. We bring with us all of the leftovers of the old year into this new one. So how do we manage all of this? How do we start well into a new year? This picture, which will be here just today and next week, and I have some to hand out at the end of the service, so you can take them with you, is a development of a blackberry. And I want us to think about, and I want you to think about in your own life, and those of you who are watching us via video, when you start growth, a seed goes in the ground and then something begins to emerge. And the question for all of us in our Christian life or our life of faith, where am I in my growth? At what stage am I as a follower of Jesus? Am I just getting started like those little buds down at the bottom there on the left-hand side? Am I just freshly getting into formation, becoming a more developed berry along the way, you could say? A person finally getting ripe, whole in form, and maybe increasingly tasty to others, reflecting the true flavor of our Lord? Am I becoming more Christ-like? Am I really becoming a blackberry? I mean, along the way, any of those processes could be stopped by wind or weather or somebody coming along and knocking the vine. Something could happen to the development of this blackberry, and it would never get to final formation. And the question for me as your pastor, as I think about all of this, is how can we keep nurturing faith in our lives? How can that be possible day by day, week by week, that we don't stop and freeze in one aspect of development, but keep going? I think that's a challenging thought. To help us in our thinking and reflection today, I'm going to read a portion of Scripture which we read briefly last week, Luke 2, just 2 verses, Luke 2, 36 through 38. Anna, a prophet, was also there in the temple, and that was when Jesus came with his parents into the temple, and they met Simeon. She was in the temple too. She was the daughter of Phanuel from the tribe of Asher, and she was very old. Her husband died when they had been married only 7 years, and then she lived as a widow to the age of 84, or as some people say, she was a widow 84 years already, one or the other. She never left the temple, but stayed there day and night, worshiping God with fasting and prayer. She came along just as Simeon was talking with Mary and Joseph, and she began praising God. She talked about the child to everyone who had been waiting expectantly for God to rescue Jerusalem. Anna comes into the Jesus story, just as Simeon has spoken to Jesus' parents, and especially Mary, as he held Jesus, the baby, in his arms. Now, all of us are looking forward to holding little Kai. So we can imagine the joy of Simeon as he met up with the parents and said, I don't know, I want your baby for a moment. And as he held Jesus in his arms, he speaks these prophetic words about who Jesus is. He describes Jesus as the Messiah. And then Anna comes up into the story, only briefly, but with deep meaning. She was a very ripe berry on God's bush. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, Anna is a saint as a prophetess. Now, I received an icon from my Greek Orthodox friend at the bakery, the one who came to my house for prayer. And she saw that I had a couple of icons on my wall, and then she said, I'm going to bring you one. It shows a very large embracing Anna, embracing, I think, the mother of Mary, and Mary's very small holding Jesus. Anna is very large, sort of surrounding all of them. I thought that was significant. She is kind of there, embracing the whole story. And even bigger than Mary, holding Jesus, which is unusual in many kinds of pictures and scenes. The western half of the church jumps over Anna, basically. The eastern half honors her, which is interesting. Our two verses reveal some meaningful things for us at the beginning of 2025, and it connects to our berry picture here. We are at the Epiphany. Tomorrow, Jesus reveals who he is to the three wise men. God shows his heart to the world in this time, and Epiphany is the revelation moment, when we get something revealed to us that we haven't known before. And the question is, have we received the revelation? Have we received what Jesus came to show us about God? Epiphany. Anna was in a place where if God was going to reveal anything in her time, it was there. She was in the temple. She was there, but not accidentally. It's not like she just happened to be there on that day. She chose to be in the temple all the time. She was the daughter of Phanuel in Greek, Penuel in Hebrew, and the name of this father means face of God. Her father's very name means face of God. This reminds one of the Old Testament story in Genesis where Jacob, remember, was wrestling with God and kind of sees him face to face. He won't let him go until God blesses him. And it made me wonder, what kind of face did Anna's father have? If his name said the face of God, what kind of face did he have? I've sometimes looked at old photos of relatives. Have you ever done that? You go and look through a box of old photos to see what different relatives look like. Out of looking at their faces, I sometimes try to see what kind of person they were. I particularly have enjoyed looking at the pictures of my father's mother, Hilda, whom I never got to know personally. Hilda died of tuberculosis when my father was only 13 years old. But he talked about his mother in beautiful ways. And so when I longingly looked at her picture, I wanted to know, what were you really like? And do you have anything in my life? Do I have anything in my life that resembles your qualities, Hilda? Now, my father used to say to my sister, Pat, that she reminded him of his mother, quiet and sweet dispositioned. It wasn't me that he said reminded him of his mother. My sister was a bit more quiet and sweet in her disposition. Not that I'm sour, mind you, but nonetheless, there must have been another little quality in my sister that reminded my father of his mother. But there were other pictures of other ancestors I've looked at. Now, Anna's father said something, face of God. Did Anna pick up some of these qualities, I wonder? Was she in the temple seeking the face of God? You might say, was she looking for her father there? Perhaps it's helpful to think, which faces have affected me and shaped me? Which faces have affected you and shaped you? Doesn't have to be parents, of course. Sometimes that's not a good face for some. But Anna was also connected to the tribe of Asher. And that was one of the 12 tribes of Israel. As one of the tribes, there was a deep connection to the history of this forming nation. For example, history of Israel, there was slavery in Egypt. And then the tribes, they formed later, but they lived through the deliverance that they received from Egypt. What would that have been like? What stories did Anna hear from her father about all of that? There was often an oral tradition. Stories were passed down from generation to generation. I know some of you have been with grandparents. I know the Heinzmans were with Herbert. And I wonder, Tom, what stories have you learned from your grandpa that affect you? What has your dad told you about his dad that affects you? I think there are things like that in the scenes or in the parts of all of our lives. What would it have been like to be delivered from Egypt? What stories did Anna hear? Did he tell her what his father and father's father had experienced? Did this longing for deliverance come from those ancient stories of oppression because she was waiting in the temple, longing for the Messiah to deliver Israel? Was she thinking about the deliverance of the past and bringing that up to the deliverance in the present? I wonder about that. How would the Messiah rescue Israel and deliver it in her day? She was waiting for it. Here's a moment for us to consider. What has the Lord delivered you from in the past? Where have you been delivered from something in your past? Where has God, through Jesus, delivered you, rescued you, saved you? Where might Jesus want to deliver you in some form in 2025? Where do you need deliverance? Where do I need deliverance? Just like Anna was hoping for deliverance in her nation then, where do we need deliverance now? We could think of that nationally. Lord knows. We have many things we could put on a list of where we want our nations to be delivered from. I can think of a whole bunch. Do you? But when we get more personal, the question is, where do I need to be delivered so that my berry can grow? My father often went and picked blackberries, and blackberries are sometimes hard to get to. They're very tough berries, but they're also in tough territory. And they can sometimes have vines and other kinds of thorns and things that really make it very excruciating to get at the berries. My question for all of us, what is in our garden of our lives that is hindering us from developing into good berries? Where are the thorns hindering it? Where are the vines twisting around our vine? Where are things engaging us which actually hinder us from growing? Maybe that's where we need to be delivered in 2025. Let's be honest about these things. Not play games with ourselves and trick ourselves into thinking the same old is enough. No, it's not. Doing the same old every year is not enough if we want to grow in our faith. And traditional religiosity will not get us anywhere. That's what all of the studies of all the current people who are leaving the churches in groves have concluded. Religiosity is not it. Here's a moment to consider, what has the Lord delivered you from in the past, and where might He want to deliver you in this year? Now, I vaguely remember my grandfather's story of being up in the northern woods, and I think it was in Wisconsin, as a lumberjack, when God spoke to him. I wish I could hear that story again. He told me that story one time. And I'm the kind of person, I need to hear a story a couple times to remember the details. But however he encountered God in the woods, he began to follow after that voice in the person of Jesus. Where have you heard the Lord speaking to you, calling out your name? In the woods? In your neighborhood? in the city? Where have you heard him speak to you? Where has he delivered you? And the question is, what's next? Anna's family in the tribe of Asher would have experienced not only the deliverance from Egypt, but they would have experienced the exile. All of the Israelites were sent off, most of them to Babylon, because they had lost their reference point. They had gotten disconnected from their God, and so that made them weak. What does that say to us? Does that make us weak if we get disconnected from our God? I think we could say probably yes. We are weakened. We're susceptible to being drifted or pulled away to some other place. We get off track. The children of Israel lost their reference point, and God allowed Babylon to take them over. Assyria just kind of took them over and took them off to Babylon, exiled them. There was the loss of home. There was the loss of the temple back then, and many comforts of home. Systematically, they were marched off to exile, into exile. An experience which was etched into the lives of future generations. Anna's family must have experienced loss in this whole procedure. I wonder what she was thinking about. What did her dad tell her? What did the face of God tell her in her face about exile? Anna's family experienced loss, but loss was not the end of the story. The question is, where have you experienced loss in 2024? What things have you lost? What has that loss done to you? Where do you feel it sting, perhaps, or sense an emptiness with the loss that you've had? This hole in your heart doesn't need to be denied. But Anna's story reveals to us she did not cut the vine on which her berry was growing because of loss. I think this is the temptation for all of us in our faith development. When something hard comes in and slices into our life, sometimes we then say, well, that's it. If that's what faith means for me, that I have to suffer loss, then I'm out of here. Her family returned from exile, and they helped to rebuild things. Perhaps that is the path to deal with loss. Return and rebuild. To use our image, the vine on which your berry is growing may need extra care when you've suffered loss. Nurture helps us to go into the future. Nurturing our vine, nurturing the elements around the vine that's growing can help us into the future. Anna's life was not historically touched by loss in some distant story of the past, like my father losing his mother. That wasn't my loss, except I lost a grandmother, unknown to me. But Anna had suffered personal loss. After a marriage of 7 years, she was a widow, and she remains so. And most commentators suggest that she was a widow for 84 years. That's amazing to me. That number alone could have formed in her a deep bitterness. But she doesn't choose to go in that direction, which I find the interesting part in her life for us as well. Can we choose how we will deal with life's losses? If her father's name reflected the face of God, then surely she must have learned to face God in the midst of loss. Did she wrestle with angels to come out limping like Jacob, but with a new name? Not bitter, but better. I remember my father and mother often talking about not wanting to be bitter old people. And I realize what they mean. I don't want to be a bitter old lady either. So along the way, when life gives you losses and struggles and difficulties, you can choose a different direction so that you don't become bitter. If her father's name meant the face of God, then surely she must have sought God's face in the midst of loss. Given that God had fulfilled the promises of her people in the past, Anna chooses to anticipate that God would fulfill his promises in the future. How can we choose to anticipate that same for us? That God will still fulfill his promises to us today. How can we choose to do that? Well, perhaps we need to embrace Anna's way as a help. She's confident that God is there. Well, after all, she lives in the temple. I mean, I don't think she would have stayed there if she didn't think God wasn't there. Maybe she was thinking, if I stay in the temple long enough, I will see God's face, just like my dad. Huh? You think so? If there was a spiritual emptiness there, she would have not stayed there. Stir up the earth around your vine. Trust the good gardener, that he will help you to keep growing. Stay in his presence. Perhaps we could say that Anna remained curious about how God would work things out. She wasn't an old busybody when Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus were talking to Simeon. She wasn't just a busybody sticking her nose in there. No, she was looking all the time. What's God going to do next? I'm anticipating somebody coming in here. I'm looking for the Messiah. I wonder how he's going to get here. I wonder if I'll see him. I wonder. And she kept looking and looking and looking. She was awake. She was aware. What is God doing? And then she saw that cluster of persons in conversation and she joins in. I wonder, can that be our stance in the new year? Join in? See what God is doing and get involved? Be looking for where God is working and say, that's where I want to be. It's a reminder. You never know when the Lord will suddenly come to his temple. You never know. Be there. Be ready to engage yourself. You may be surprised. And finally, Anna shows us endurance. Growth takes time. The fulfillment in our lives to make us a ripe berry takes time. There is no hothouse faith, but a faith that grows naturally and consistently. In the enduring across time, Anna was watching. She was awake. She wanted to be aware of how God was working in the world. And she was right in the mix of the Messiah's arrival. What joy! Where will God meet you and engage you in what he's doing this year? That's the exciting question. It's not like, okay, let's just enter another stupid year. Same old thing. We do our work. We buy groceries. We make food. We, on and on, the cycle of endless things. Is that it? Is that it? Is that what life is just about? Just doing those things on and on and on and on? Or is God going to do something that we better stay awake for? Anticipate. Be engaged with, so that when it happens, we'll be there and our hearts can be filled with joy. Interesting that the numbers, and I end the sermon today with these numbers, says something too. She's 84 years old. And that's 12 times 7. And her marriage was 7 years. 12 and 7 in Jewish numerology are numbers for completion and fullness. Anna was a ripened berry. Whole, complete, tasty, beautiful. I would have loved to have met Anna, wouldn't you? I think it would be good if all of us could say, are people looking forward to meeting us because they know we've been keeping awake, we've been keeping alert, we're in the temple, we're in the presence of God, we have a connection to the face of God? I think that's all possible for us in 2025. And my prayer for all of us is that we will go in that direction. Let's be an Anna type, should we? May the Lord help us. Amen.